March 2011. A cartel informant handed 2 phone numbers to American DEA agents. Those numbers were the private lines of one of the most feared bosses in Mexico. Only a handful of men alive had them. 3 days later, gunmen rolled into a quiet Mexican town and started erasing the families of everyone who might have talked. Here are 9 cartel snitches who betrayed the wrong boss.
En Estados Unidos, el Z-40 y el Z-42 fueron presentados a su audiencia de seguimiento en la Corte Federal de Washington, D.C. Ya no están bajo la amenaza de pena de muerte, pero sí de prisión perpetua. Ángel Hernández tiene los detalles.
Hector Moreno was a Zetas lieutenant. Mario Alfonso Cuellar, better known as Poncho, ran a plaza for him. Both men had something almost nobody else in the organization had. They had the private BlackBerry PIN numbers of the 2 brothers who ran the entire cartel. They also thought handing those numbers over would be the smartest move of their lives. Here's how it happened. The DEA was running an operation out of Texas called Too Legit to Quit. Agents squeezed a Dallas-based Zetas distributor named Jose Vasquez Jr. They threatened to jail his wife and his mother. Vasquez folded, then leaned on Moreno and Cuellar to give up the pins. Those pins were gold, trackable, live, and attached directly to Miguel Angel Trevino Morales and his brother Omar, Z40 and Z42. And then the DEA did something it would spend years trying to explain. It passed that intelligence to a Mexican federal police unit that leaked like a broken pipe. The numbers went straight back to the Treviños. Now understand who these informants had just crossed. Z40 wasn't a businessman with a violent streak. He was the most sadistic boss in modern cartel history, a man whose signature was cooking his enemies alive inside oil drums. He didn't punish traitors. He deleted everything a traitor had ever touched. March 18, 2011, the trucks rolled into Allende, Coahuila. The gunmen weren't hunting Moreno and Cuellar. They already knew both men had run, so they went after the surnames instead. Garza, Gaitan, Moreno, Villanueva, anyone who shared a last name, a bloodline, or a phone number with the men who talked. They bulldozed and burned around 40 homes and 7 ranches. They took men, women, and children. Over roughly 3 days, and for weeks after, they moved through Allende and the neighboring towns of Nava and Piedras Negras, like an army clearing ground. The town called for help. The emergency line logged 1,451 calls. Nobody came. They couldn't come. According to a study cited by the San Antonio Current, the Zetas had already bought the entire Allende police force. The going rate was about $3,600 a month. That's what it cost to make a town's protection disappear. The death toll is still argued over today. ProPublica and National Geographic documented evidence of at least 60 victims. Mexican state authorities first said 28, then 42. Former traffickers who testified in a San Antonio federal courtroom put the real number closer to 300. And the 2 men who started it all? Hector Moreno and Poncho Cuellar survived. They ran, reportedly with about $5 million of Zeta money, and later became protected United States witnesses. Their families paid the bill instead. For years, almost nobody outside Coahuila knew this happened. There were no bodies to bury. The gunmen took people, and the people never came back. So on paper, most of them were simply missing. It took an American courtroom to force it into the light. Zetas members prosecuted in Texas began describing what they'd done in Allende, and investigative reporters pulled the rest of the thread. One of the men involved, Hugo Cesar Roman Chavarria, received a life sentence in a federal court in Texas. Years later, a ProPublica reporter sat down with DEA agent Richard Martinez and asked him how he felt about the leak. Martinez had been named DEA Agent of the Year in 2011. The same year Allende burned, he broke down. All he could say was that he'd rather not answer.
It was in 1985, Enrique Salazar, or Kiki, was undercover investigating the Guadalajara cartel. Blamed for a massive raid and ordered to die, Kiki was kidnapped as he left the U.S. consulate in Guadalajara while on his way to meet his wife for lunch.
Most people on this list flipped on a boss. This next man was the boss's snitch problem. Kiki Camarena, who everybody called Kiki, was a DEA special agent working out of Guadalajara in the early 80s, and he was very good at one specific thing. He built informants. Farmers, drivers, low-level workers. People the cartel never looked at twice. Those informants found something enormous. November 14, 1984, 450 Mexican soldiers landed on a marijuana plantation in Chihuahua called Rancho Buffalo. It was 1,000 hectares, roughly 2,500 acres of product, worth an estimated $8 billion a year. Time magazine called it the bust of the century. The Guadalajara cartel lost it all in a single afternoon. Rafael Caro Quintero wanted to know one thing: who talked? February 7, 1985, Camarena walked out of the United States consulate in Guadalajara to meet his wife for lunch. Men grabbed him off the street in broad daylight. They weren't street thugs. Several were state police officers. That's the part people miss about this story. Kiki Camarena didn't underestimate the cartel's guns. He underestimated how much of the Mexican government the cartel had already bought. The DFS secret police, senior officials, the men in uniform, Caro Quintero and Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo, hadn't just built a drug empire. They'd rented a state. They held Camarena for more than 30 hours. They weren't trying to send a message. They were interrogating him. They wanted the names of every informant he'd ever recruited and every file the DEA had built. His pilot, Alfredo Zavala Avalar, was taken the same week. Both men were later found on a ranch outside the city. What the cartel didn't count on was the response. The murder of a federal agent triggered Operation Allende, the largest homicide investigation the DEA has ever run. It didn't end in 1985. It didn't end in 1995. It ran for 40 years. Washington shut the border down to a crawl. Every vehicle crossing north got searched. Trade ground to a halt, and the pressure on Mexico City became unbearable within weeks. The Guadalajara cartel didn't survive it. Caro Quintero was arrested in Costa Rica. Ernesto Fonseca Carrillo went down. Felix Gallardo, the man they called El Padrino, eventually followed, and the organization he'd built got carved into the regional cartels that still run Mexico today. The Sinaloa cartel, the Tijuana cartel, the Juarez cartel. All of them are descendants of an empire that collapsed because of what happened to one agent and his informants. Then, 2013, a Mexican court released Caro Quintero on a technicality after 28 years. He walked out and disappeared. The DEA put him on its most wanted list and waited 9 more years to get him back. February 2025, Caro Quintero was one of 29 prisoners expelled from Mexico and flown to the United States. He was arraigned in a New York courtroom and pleaded not guilty. Acting DEA Chief Derek Maltz put it simply: no matter how long it takes, no matter how far you run, justice will find you.
Diez años de cárcel a Iván Reyes Arzate, conocido como La Reina, apegándose un poco más a la recomendación que había hecho la Fiscalía de los Estados Unidos de esta década de prisión para este mexicano que fue excomandante de la Policía Federal y que bajo ese cargo recibió sobornos y traicionó la confianza que el gobierno de Estados Unidos tenía en él, según se dijo esta mañana.
Now here's the one that should genuinely scare you. Iván Reyes Arzate commanded Mexico's Sensitive Investigative Unit. If you've never heard of the SIU, that's the point. It was the DEA's answer to Mexican corruption, a hand-picked federal police unit built to be leak-proof. Every officer was vetted, polygraphed, some trained at Quantico. Reyes ran it. He was the trusted bridge between American agents and Mexican police. His alias inside the cartel world was La Reina, because the man in charge of protecting American secrets was selling them. According to the federal complaint against him, a meeting took place near Cuernavaca in 2009. Reyes was there, so was Arturo Beltran Leiva, one of the most feared bosses in the country. Somebody put a binder on the table. Inside that binder was a photograph and the identity of a DEA confidential informant, a Colombian who'd been arrested in Miami, flipped almost immediately, and become instrumental in building the indictment against Arturo Beltran Leiva himself. Think about that. The informant had helped build the case against the exact man now holding his photograph. Prosecutors allege that Arturo ordered his enforcer, Mario Pineda Villa, to take the informant, and that the killing happened in front of Reyes. The officers in the room allegedly split a $3 million reward. And this wasn't a one-off. ProPublica found that 2 of the men who held Reyes' job before him were assassinated after leaks. Roberto Velasco Bravo was killed outside his home in May 2008, 7 months into the role. Ruben Omar Ramirez was shot by gunmen on motorcycles. That happened one day after he told the DEA he was afraid for his life. Reyes eventually walked into a United States federal courthouse in Chicago and surrendered. He pleaded no contest there and took 40 months. He later pleaded guilty in Brooklyn and took 10 years. His lawyers have denied he ever exposed anyone. But the damage was never really about one man's sentence. The SIU was the single-channel American agents used to work inside Mexico. Every wiretap, every target, every source ran through it. If the commander of that unit was selling, then for years, the safest assumption for any informant in Mexico was that the DEA could not protect their name. A lot of agents have said privately that this is the case that changed how they work. Some stopped writing certain names down at all, but the informant has no name in any public record, not one. He gave the United States government everything, and the government can't even tell you what to call him. As for the alleged triggerman, Pineda Villa turned up dead himself later that same year. The only man who could have confirmed the whole thing was gone.
Edgar Enrique Vallardo del Villar, exmando medio de la Policía Federal y testigo protegido de la Subprocuraduría de Investigación Especializada en Delincuencia Organizada de la PGR, fue ejecutado en un Starbucks de la colonia del Valle, confirmaron fuentes de la Procuraduría General de Justicia del DF.
Some of these men died because their cover broke. Edgar Vallardo died with the full protection of the Mexican state wrapped around him. Vallardo was a federal police investigator who'd been secretly feeding information to the DEA. When he was finally exposed, he did what the system tells you to do. He testified. His statements helped build a case against a Mexican police chief named Victor Gerardo Garay. The government put him in its witness protection program. December 1st, 2009, Vallardo sat inside a Starbucks in the Del Valle neighborhood of Mexico City. Middle of the day, middle of the capital, coffee in front of him. 2 men in suits walked in. They fired more than a dozen rounds and walked back out. No hoods, no masks, no attempt to do it quietly at night on some back road. They killed a protected federal witness in a coffee shop in one of the safest neighborhoods in Mexico City because they wanted every other potential informant in the country to see exactly how little that protection was worth. Time magazine wrote about the program afterward and called it witness detection. That joke had teeth. The Mexican protected witness system of that era didn't hide people the way the American one does. There were no new identities waiting, no new countries, no permanent relocation. Witnesses were handed to the same federal institutions the cartels had already bought, and then asked to trust them. Vallardo had reportedly told people he knew he was living on borrowed time. He kept testifying anyway. And Vallardo wasn't alone that month. Weeks earlier, another protected witness had been found dead inside a federal safe house. His name was Jesus Zambada Reyes, and he was the nephew of Ismael El Mayo Zambada. The official ruling wasn't homicide. Almost nobody believed it.
Narcotraficante Damaso Lopez Núñez, alias el licenciado y exmano derecha también del Chapo Guzmán, va a dejar la cárcel en noviembre del 2032, después de su testimonio en contra del líder del cártel de Sinaloa y de vincular a Emma Coronel en su fuga del altiplano en 2015. Las autoridades de Estados Unidos le retiraron ya la sentencia de cadena perpetua que recibió en 2018.
Damaso Lopez Núñez was the man who got El Chapo out of prison. 2001, he was a senior official at the Puente Grande Federal Penitentiary. He helped engineer the escape that turned Joaquin Guzman from an inmate into a legend. Guzman never forgot it. He made Damaso a godfather to his sons and one of the most trusted men in the Sinaloa cartel. Everyone called him El Licenciado, the graduate. Then, 2016, El Chapo got caught again, and this time he wasn't coming back. Damaso looked at the empire and did the math. Chapo's sons were young. El Mayo Zambada was old. He decided the throne was open. February 2017, an ambush was launched in Sinaloa that allegedly targeted El Mayo and two of Guzman's sons. Damaso's faction was blamed. Here's what he'd miscalculated. Attacking Los Chapitos and El Mayo at the same time didn't make him a contender. It made him a target for both halves of the largest cartel on earth, simultaneously. So he did the only thing left. He started talking to the Americans. The capture itself is almost too strange to be real. Damaso had hired a hacker to secure his communications. That hacker was working with the government. The phone he handed over had spyware running the entire time, and the front camera was recording. They watched him sit in a Mexico City seafood restaurant, eating a tortilla. It was the first image anyone had of his face in 15 years. May 2017, they took him in Mexico City. He was extradited the following year and became a cooperating witness against the man he'd broken out of prison. He testified at the Brooklyn trial, including about Emma Coronel's alleged role in the 2015 escape.
Damaso Lopez's brief but bloody battle for control of one of Mexico's most powerful criminal groups, the Sinaloa Cartel, ended abruptly with his arrest on Tuesday morning. When Guzman was captured and extradited, Lopez rushed to take over his drug smuggling empire. Guzman's sons had other ideas, and cartel civil war broke out.
His son went further. Damaso Lopez Serrano, known as Mini Lick, drove himself to the Calexico border crossing and surrendered to American agents, reportedly after El Mayo put a price on his head. He cooperated. He was released in 2022. And then the story curdled. December 2024, Mini Lick was arrested again in Virginia on fentanyl charges. February 4th, 2026, a federal judge sentenced him to 5 years. But Mexico wants him for something else entirely. Prosecutors there have named him as the alleged mastermind behind the 2017 murder of journalist Javier Valdez. He can't be extradited because he's an American protected witness. Both father and son deny any role in that killing. Valdez's widow, Griselda Triana, was asked about the 5-year sentence. She said 5 more years means nothing to this man.
It was a state funeral for a man hailed as a national hero in Mexico's drug war, Marine Melquisedec Angula Cordova, who died in a daring raid last week that also took the life of perhaps the country's most powerful drug kingpin, Arturo Beltran Leiva.
Everything you've heard so far involves someone who talked. This next story is about a boss who only believed someone talked and what he did with that belief. January 2008, Mexican forces captured Alfredo Beltran Leiva, known as El Mochomo. The arrest was clean. Too clean. His brothers reached one conclusion. El Chapo had given him up. Then Guzman's son, Ivan Archivaldo, walked free on a technicality. And as far as the Beltran Leiva brothers were concerned, that settled it. Their partner of 2 decades had traded their blood for his own. Whether that's true has never been proven. It didn't need to be. It only needed to be believed. Arturo Beltran Leiva was not a man you wanted holding a grudge. They called him El Jefe de Jefes, the boss of bosses, and he'd spent years buying his way into Mexico's police, courts, and politics. His reach even ran into the Mexican office of Interpol. He kept elite hit squads on payroll, trained by former soldiers. He didn't declare war on El Chapo. He went after his family. May 2008, El Chapo's 22-year-old son, Edgar Guzman Lopez, walked through a shopping center parking lot in Culiacan. Around 15 gunmen were waiting. They opened up with assault rifles and grenade launchers. The Sinaloa cartel split in half that day, and thousands of people died in the war that followed. Arturo kept going. He had Federal Police Commissioner Edgar Milan Gomez assassinated inside his own home. Then the paranoia turned inward. Convinced his organization was riddled with informants, he began killing his own people, including the sons of a longtime associate named Ponciano Dalba. December 2009, Mexican Marines cornered him in an apartment in Cuernavaca. He didn't surrender. The firefight lasted nearly 2 hours. One Marine died in that raid. 2 weeks later, gunmen went to that man's family home and murdered his mother, his siblings, and his aunt. But here's the twist nobody saw coming. Arturo's own top enforcer, Edgar Valdez Villarreal, known as La Barbie, got squeezed out in the succession fight. Years later, evidence surfaced that La Barbie had been quietly feeding information to American agents the entire time. So the boss who tore Mexico apart hunting for a snitch had one standing directly behind him. La Barbie was sentenced to 49 years in 2018. And the last detail is almost poetic. Years afterward, when El Chapo needed a defense attorney in the United States, he hired the very same lawyer who had defended Alfredo Beltran Leiva.
In the El Chapo trial, Vicente Zambada, the son of El Chapo's partner Ismael Zambada, took the stand. Vicente was set to be the heir to the Sinaloa cartel before his arrest and extradition. Zambada confirmed what previous witnesses testified, including corruption.
November 2018, a Brooklyn courtroom. The government's very first witness against El Chapo Guzman walked to the stand. It was Jesus Zambada Garcia, El Rey, brother of Ismael El Mayo Zambada, the man who co-founded the Sinaloa cartel and stayed free for half a century while everyone around him fell. He laid the whole thing out: structure, routes, bribes, killings. Then his nephew followed him. Vicente Zambada Niebla, called Vicentillo, had been the cartel's logistics chief. He was El Mayo's son and El Chapo's godson. He testified about the inner workings of an organization his own father built. Understand the position both men were in. They weren't just testifying against El Chapo. Every word also exposed El Mayo, and every word landed in front of Chapo's sons, the men who run the cartel today and who have never been known for forgiveness. There's a moment from that trial that the reporters in the room never forgot. El Rey finished his testimony and stepped down from the stand. He passed within a few feet of El Chapo. He crossed his arms and gave a small nod. El Chapo nodded back. Two men who'd built an empire together, saying goodbye without a single word. El Rey was released in 2019 and removed from the United States sanctions list in 2021. He now lives on supervised release, and by his own account, he started writing corridos. His debut track is called El Prisionero. Vicentillo received 15 years, credited largely to time served, and is believed to be living inside witness protection. But the sequel is where this gets remarkable. 2023, El Rey Zambada walked into another Brooklyn courtroom. This time, the defendant was Genaro Garcia Luna, the man who ran Mexico's entire public security apparatus and who had shaken hands with American presidents. El Rey testified he'd personally delivered $5 million in bribes, $3 million in one payment, $2 million more later. He described watching Garcia Luna leave a restaurant on Paseo de la Reforma, carrying the money.
Genaro Garcia Luna's U.S. charges include taking millions of dollars in bribes from the infamous Sinaloa cartel.
Garcia Luna was convicted on 5 counts. October 2024, a federal judge sentenced him to 460 months. That's 38 years and 4 months, plus a $2 million fine. The cartel's own snitches took down the most powerful police official in Mexico, and he almost got away with it, because for years he was the man the Americans trusted most.
Él es Jorge Salcedo, vive en Estados Unidos protegido por las autoridades de ese país y su lugar exacto de residencia es hoy un enigma. Salió de Colombia huyendo después de que entregó a la DEA a Miguel Rodríguez, jefe del cartel de Cali en 1995 y cobró una millonaria recompensa.
The Cali cartel didn't operate like the Medellin cartel. No car bombs, no public wars. They wore suits, bought politicians, and moved roughly 80% of the world's cocaine while looking like a legitimate business empire. Jorge Salcedo was their head of security. He wasn't a trafficker by trade. He was an engineer, a former military reservist, hired to protect the Rodriguez-Orejuela brothers. And for years, he told himself he was just doing a technical job for dangerous men. That story stopped working the day he watched Miguel Rodriguez-Orejuela have 4 people killed in front of him. Then came the order that broke him. Salcedo was told to murder the cartel's own accountant, a man named Guillermo Palomari. Now think about who he was preparing to betray. The Cali cartel had financed a Colombian presidential campaign. They owned judges, generals, and entire police divisions. There was no authority in Colombia they hadn't touched. Going to the government meant going to people who might already work for them. So Salcedo went around the government. He contacted the CIA, then the DEA. August 1995, he walked American and Colombian agents straight to Miguel Rodriguez-Orejuela's hideout. Miguel had a secret compartment built into the apartment, a hidden closet called a caleta. He was still scrambling toward it when they took him. And here's the detail that says everything. After his arrest, Miguel actually complimented the police on the quality of their intelligence. He was impressed. He had no idea his own security chief had drawn the map. Salcedo also got Palomari out alive, and the accountant became one of the most damaging witnesses the cartel ever faced. The empire came apart within months. Salcedo and his extended family vanished into American witness protection with a reward reported around $1.7 million. He lives under a name that isn't his. He's given interviews over the years, and he bristles at one word in particular: snitch. The Rodriguez-Orejuela brothers were extradited and pleaded guilty in 2006, taking 30 years each. Gilberto died in an American prison in 2022. And one quick correction, because the television version of this story has confused a lot of people. The cartel's Harvard-educated money launderer, Franklin Jurado, moved around $36 million through more than 100 accounts across 9 countries. He was arrested in Luxembourg, extradited, and pleaded guilty in Brooklyn. On screen, he gets murdered in prison. In reality, he served 7.5 years and walked out alive. The last story on this list is where the whole pattern started. 1992, Pablo Escobar was running the Medellin cartel from inside La Catedral, the prison he'd designed and built for himself. He had cooks. He had a soccer field. He had guards who worked for him instead of the state. 2 of his most productive lieutenants were Fernando Galeano and Gerardo Moncada. They were earners. They kept the money moving while Escobar sat in his luxury cell. And Escobar became convinced they were skimming. He called both men to the prison. Whatever explanation they offered, it wasn't enough. Neither of them left La Catedral alive. That was the mistake. Escobar had spent a decade using terror as a management tool, and it had always worked. Bombs, assassinations, judges, journalists. But this time he'd killed his own earners inside a government prison over money. Their surviving people didn't scatter, they organized. Diego Murillo, known as Don Berna, had worked directly under Galeano. Judy Moncada, Gerardo's widow, had money and motive. The Castaño brothers had paramilitary experience and manpower. Together they formed a group with a name that was less an organization than a promise. Los Pepes, people persecuted by Pablo Escobar. They knew everything. Safe houses, accountants, lawyers, sicarios, girlfriends, family. They handed that map to the Colombian authorities hunting Escobar, and they started working through his network themselves at a pace that reportedly reached several dead a day. Escobar had spent years being untouchable because nobody on the inside would ever talk. Then he gave the inside a reason. December 1993, he was cornered on a rooftop in Medellin and killed. The most powerful criminal in Colombian history was brought down, at least in part, by men he'd created himself the day he decided 2 of his own were expendable. Don Berna went on to become a kingpin in his own right. There's a pattern buried in all 9 of these stories, and it's not the one you'd expect. Almost none of these men were caught by the bosses they betrayed. They were caught by the leaks. A phone number handed to the wrong police unit, A binder slid across a table. A protected witness whose address was worth more than his life. Hector Moreno and Pancho Cuellar are still alive somewhere in the United States. Allende is still counting. So here's the real question. If the people whose job it was to protect these informants couldn't keep a single name safe, who exactly was the wrong boss to betray?